take our souls and set them on fire. Amen. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last week. Last week, Jesus and his disciples, after having been on retreat way up north in Gentile territory, are making their way back to Galilee, back to Capernaum. And on the way, Jesus once again reminds his disciples what is going to happen to him when they finally make their way all the way to Jerusalem. How he's going to be betrayed, killed, and rise again on the third day. And the disciples don't understand any of this, and they're too afraid to ask. And more to the point, they've got something more interesting that they're discussing and debating. Namely, which one of them is the greatest? And Jesus knows that this conversation is going on, and so when he gets back to Capernaum, when they get back to his house, he gathers them together and says, listen, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and slave of all. And then he places a little child in their midst. And this child is there not because this child represents innocence, but because this child represents people who have no social status and people who have no legal rights. And he says, if you welcome one such child in my name, it's just like welcoming me. It's just like welcoming God who sent me. If you show hospitality to one of the least of these, then you are showing it to me. And no sooner had Jesus uttered these words than John pipes up and talks about an incident where they didn't show hospitality. And I don't know what he thinks Jesus is going to say about this. But he says, you know, teacher, there was a guy who was casting out demons in your name, and we stopped him because he wasn't following us. Based upon Jesus' response, my guess is that John thought that somehow he was protecting Jesus' honor, that he was standing up for Jesus. And Jesus talks to the disciples and says, don't stop them. Because someone who is able to cast out demons in my name will not be able in the next breath to curse me. Because whoever is not against us is for us. Jesus is trying to enlarge in the circle of the disciples and who they recognize as belonging to Jesus. And then he goes through all of these kind of very hyperbolic statements about not putting stumbling blocks in the way of other people who are trying to follow him. And then he ends with these words, have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. That reminded me of the prayer of St. Francis. Now, St. Francis, his feast day is later this week. I think it's on Thursday, October 4th. And today we're going to be out in Memorial Garden blessing animals this afternoon as a celebration of the feast day of St. Francis. But you remember his famous prayer that begins, Lord, make us instruments of your peace. And what do instruments of peace do? Well, they scatter seeds. They sow seeds. They sow seeds of love, of pardon, of faith, of hope, of light, of joy. In a world of hatred and injury and despair and darkness. And then he says in his prayer, Divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. And I have to say, this week, the phrase that stuck out to me was that one, let us not seek to be understood, but to understand. We all know that we live in a fractured and fracturing world, a broken world, a polarized world. And I just wonder if we took that phrase seriously, if we practiced that, not seeking to be understood, but seeking to understand, what difference might that make in our world? And what would that look like? Well, on Thursday, I got a bit of inspiration around this. I was inspired. I dropped, Thaddeus has fencing in Wichita on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. And so after I dropped him off at fencing, I was driving away, I turned on the radio, and I caught the last part of a program on NPR called On Being. And it was a fascinating program because it was an interview. It was actually an interview from 2011 with Frances Kissling. And Frances Kissling is a Catholic, and she was the president of Catholics for Choice for about 20 years. And the reason why she was being interviewed is because the interviewer calls her a bridge person. Someone who actively seeks to develop relationships with those who are on the opposite side of the fence. She's a pro-choice activist, but she actively seeks relationships with those who are on the other end of the spectrum, on the pro-life end of the spectrum. And the interview was fascinating. And as I said, she's very intentional about developing these relationships because what she says we need to approach others with enthusiasm for difference. If we want things to change, if we don't want things to be so polarized, to actively and enthusiastically seek those with whom we differ. She said, I'm the toughest of fighters. I love to fight and I love to win. And she has quite a record in debates. But she says, I think what I have learned is that you've got to approach differences with this notion that there is good in the other and in the other position. If we want to change things, she said, if we want to move away from all of this polarization and discord, not just on this issue, but on lots of issues, and not just on big issues, but just even personal issues that we might have with our neighbors, if we want to move away from that discord, from the extremes, then our impulse can't simply be to win. Our impulse can't simply be whose argument, whose position is the greatest. The impulse that we need is the impulse to seek understanding. To understand why a person holds the position they do, what that position is. Not necessarily even to find common ground, not necessarily even to agree, but just to understand. She says, I do think that when people who disagree with each other come together with a goal of gaining a better understanding of why the other person believes what they do, good things come of that. I've changed my views on some aspects of abortion based upon having a deeper understanding of the values and concerns of people who disagree with me. And as a result, I have an interest in trying to find a way that I can honor some of their values without giving up mine. Well, how do you do that? She says, well, one of the qualities of seeking this understanding is vulnerability. The courage to be vulnerable in front of those with whom we passionately disagree. Well, how do you do that? She says, one of the ways to do that in a concrete way is to acknowledge the good that you see in another person's position. And also to acknowledge the things in your own position that trouble you. So instead of staying on the extremes, instead of having these absolute positions, to be able to sit with somebody else and to acknowledge what is good in their position, and at the same time acknowledge where you questions that she asks herself. What is it in my own position that gives me trouble? What is it in the position of the other that I'm attracted to? Now this interview ends, I won't go into the details of the interview, but the interview ends in an interesting way. They bring on one of these individuals that Kissling has developed a relationship with in this pro-life, pro-choice debate. His name is David Gushee. He grew up Catholic, but as a high schooler, he became a Baptist. He's now a Baptist minister and an evangelical and staunch proponent of pro-life. And so, as the interview ends, what the interviewer does is asks both of them these questions. David, what do you find good about the other position? What troubles you about your own? Francis, what do you find good about the pro-life position? What troubles you about your own? And I have to say it was inspiring to listen to these two people in this very contentious debate just share with one another and connect with one another over these questions. I think that that's a picture of what it means to have salt in ourselves and to be at peace with one another. Not that we will agree necessarily with one another. Not that we will even find such much common ground on certain things. But that there's understanding. Because with understanding comes a connection between people that will allow us to walk together down very difficult roads. Jesus is on the way to the cross, and he's inviting his disciples to follow him along this way. And I would suggest that this sort of dialogue is very much what it means to take up our cross and follow him. To be vulnerable enough to acknowledge what is good in those with whom we are opposing. And to acknowledge our own limitations, our own doubts, our own troubled hearts on the positions that we hold. Polar bears and penguins, they may be equipped to live at the poles, to live at the extremes. But human beings were not designed to live at the extremes. We were designed to live somewhere in the middle. And this impulse, these activities of seeking understanding, I think help map out that territory in the middle and make it hospitable, make it